Hello students, welcome to the lecture on trade blocs, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Describe the regional trade blocs, explain the World Trade Organization, discuss about WTO Dispute Settlement, explain the European Economic Community, define the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, describe South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, explain the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Let's start with the concept of trade blocs. The internet and technological advances in telecommunications trade partners across the globe. Yet, this does not mean that trade barriers are non-existent. While the World Trade Organization (WTO) promotes global multilateral free trade, regional trade blocs provide their members with the mechanisms for competing in an aggressive global market.
You may recall from the previous episode on the World Trade Organization, formerly known as GATT, that the process of coming to agreement with over 150 countries involved is a long and arduous journey, with every round taking longer and longer to complete. Given that, some countries are finding it more expedient to work in smaller groups, usually with neighbors, to eliminate trade barriers. But even in smaller groups, there's a spectrum of types of trade blocs. A trade bloc is a group of countries which trade with one another, but they have an agreement among members to reduce trade barriers with one another. The differences among the types of trade blocs come from both internal rules, that is, rules among the member countries, and external rules, or dealings with non-members. Let me show you. The lowest level of commitment to trade barrier reduction is a preferential trade area, where members lower, but do not eliminate, barriers among themselves. Dealings with non-members are not addressed, so member countries maintain policies of their own choosing with regard to non-member countries. The next level of commitment is a free trade area, where member countries agree to eliminate trade barriers among themselves, but continue to maintain independent policies in their dealings with non-member countries. An example of a free trade area is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, where Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. have agreed to eliminate the barriers among themselves, but each maintains independent policy when trading with other areas of the world. The third type of trade bloc is a customs union, where member countries not only eliminate internal trade barriers, but they also adopt common policies for trade barriers on any non-members. For example, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus formed a customs union in 2010. Those countries are eliminating trade barriers among themselves, but would agree to some common set of trade standards on anyone who's not in their group. After the customs union, trade blocs begin to address the flow not only of goods and services, but also the flow of resources like labor. In a common market, members eliminate internal trade barriers, adopt common external trade barriers, and allow free movement of resources among the member countries. Think about the U.S. If you lived in New York and wanted to leave New York for a job in California, there are no barriers to prevent you from making that choice. Examples of common markets include Mercosur, also known as the Southern Cone Market, whose members include Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela's membership pending at the moment. Other markets would be the East African Common Market or the West African Common Market. Beyond the Common Market is economic union. Members eliminate internal barriers, adopt common external barriers, allow free movement of resources among the members, and adopt a uniform set of economic policies. The European Union, once the common currency had been adopted, became a prime example of an economic union. With one currency, they had to adopt one monetary policy. At the final structure in this spectrum, there's full integration of the member states, like the United States.
Regardless of the size of our business, it is essential to know the international trade regulations that govern our import and/or export operations. Each trade bloc, date established, list of members, goals, population, and GDP PPP. A regional trading bloc is a group of countries within a geographical region that protect themselves from imports from non-members. Trading blocs are a form of economic integration and increasingly shaping the pattern of world trade. Let us now discuss the regional trade blocs. In general terms, regional trade blocs are associations of nations at a governmental level to promote trade within the bloc and defend its members against global competition. Defense against global competition is obtained through established tariffs on goods produced by member states, import quotas, government subsidies, onerous bureaucratic import processes, and technical and other non-tariff barriers. Since trade is not an isolated activity, member states within regional blocs also cooperate in economic, political, security, climatic, and other issues affecting the region. An order or trade submitted for sale or purchase of a large quantity of securities. A block trade involves a significantly large number of shares or bonds being traded at an arranged price between parties outside of the open markets in order to lessen the impact of such a large trade hitting the tape. Types of regional trade blocs. Preferential trade area. Preferential trade area or PTAs exist when countries within a geographical region agree to reduce or eliminate tariff barriers on selected goods imported from other members of the area. This is often the first small step towards the creation of a trading bloc. Free trade area or FTAs, they are created when two or more countries in a region agree to reduce or eliminate barriers to trade on all goods coming from other members. The customs union. A customs union involves the removal of tariff barriers between members, plus the acceptance of a common or a unified external tariff against a non-member. This means that members may negotiate as a single bloc with third parties, such as with other trading blocs or with the WTO. A common market. Common market is the first significant step towards full economic integration and occurs when member countries trade freely in all economic resources, not just tangible goods. This means that all barriers to trade in goods, services, capital and labor are removed. In addition, as well as removing tariffs, non-tariff barriers are also reduced and eliminated. The European Union, EU. The EU is the world's largest trading bloc and second largest economy after the USA. The EU was originally called the Economic Community, Common Market or the Six after its formation following the Treaty of Rome in 1957. The original 6 members were Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg. Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, WTO, is an international organization that establishes rules for international trade through consensus among its members, the member states. It also resolves disputes between the members, which are all signatories to its set of trade agreements. The principles of the trading system. The WTO discussions should follow these fundamental principles of trading. A trading system should be free of discrimination in the sense that one country cannot privilege a particular trading partner, others within the system, nor can it discriminate against foreign products and services. A trading system should tend towards more freedom, that is, towards fewer trade barriers, tariffs and non-tariff barriers. A trading system should be predictable, with foreign companies and governments reassured that trade barriers will not be raised arbitrarily and that markets will remain open. A trading system should tend towards greater competition.
The WTO is an international agreement of member nations committed in principle to free multinational trade through the reduction of trade barriers. As a multilateral organization, it covers goods, services, and intellectual property rights. Established by the Uruguay Round, the organization replaced GATT, or General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, on January 1, 1995. The organization is now led by Director General Pascal Lamy. Currently, there are 153 members, such as the United States, UK, France, and China. The most notable absentees, frequently referred to as observer countries, are those in the Middle East such as Iran. Some nations have been rejected in the past, while others are still attempting to meet the requirements for accession. The 5 main aims of the WTO are to increase international trade by lowering trade barriers, to be a forum for trade negotiations, to handle disputes among member countries, to create economic stability in the world through a multilateral system, and lastly, to cooperate with other multinational corporations. As for the structures and mechanisms of the organization, the WTO is dominated by its main decision-making body called the Ministerial Conference, which is comprised of all member countries and is required to meet at least once in 2 years for negotiating trade agreements. The major subsidiary body is the General Council, which operates in 2 forms, one being the Dispute Settlement body, which oversees the dispute settlement procedures, and the other being the Trade Policy Review Body, which constantly reviews the trade policies of each member nation. The General Council delegates responsibility to three other bodies, namely the Councils for Trade in Goods, trade-related aspects of intellectual property, and trade in services. These bodies report to the General Council as they deal with trade agreements in goods, intellectual property rights, and services, respectively. The success of the WTO in meeting its official aims is debatable. Therefore, it is best to examine both the positive and negative aspects of the organization. Firstly, the WTO's aim to liberalize international trade is considered successful. As a hypothetical example, two countries with comparative advantage on certain commodities are able to benefit from improved trade conditions if they were to specialize in products that yield a lower opportunity cost. Trade agreements can also reduce taxes on the exchange of goods and services, which leads to freer access to the foreign exchange market, which in turn leads to economic growth. However, critics claim that oftentimes less developed countries have little influence in decision making. Some countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa, have faced lower real GDP per capita than they had 10 years ago. It is also argued that WTO treaties are unfairly biased towards the interests of more developed countries and multinational corporations. Lastly, critics have pointed out that free trade does not necessarily make life better for the poor, but have only resulted in a widening gap between the rich and the poor. The WTO has encountered increased economic instability, mainly due to the current economic crisis that began with the collapse of the mortgage market in the United States. It is currently involved in the Doha Development Round, which commenced in November 2001 and continues to this day. In this trade negotiation round, the WTO aims to encourage global trade by reducing protectionist measures. The major issues at hand include agriculture, industrial tariffs, trade remedies, and non-tariff barriers. However, the success of the Doha round is debated because of two problems. Firstly, the US and the European Union are asked to lower subsidies on agricultural commodities. Secondly, the newly industrialized countries such as India and Brazil are pushed by the most developed countries to lower trade barriers or imported products. As a final remark, the World Trade Organization is considered very important, especially with the globalization of this world, because it encourages foreign direct investment, which refers to the investment by overseas firms in another country. Although disputes exist in, for example, the Doha round negotiations, the organization continuously attempts to monitor economic policies of members and observers, manage trade disputes, and administer trade agreements. As it aims to integrate MDCs, NICs, LDCs, and MNCs through its multilateral system, the WTO has certainly become a fundamental forum for trade negotiations around the world.
Subjects of WTO: agriculture, services, non-agriculture, intellectual property rights, trade investment, competition policy, government, procurement and trade facilities, trade rules, dispute settlements, trade and environment. Role of WTO in globalization. WTO plays an important role in the principle of trade without discrimination in the free market trade. The most favored nation, MFN. Treating other people equally. Under the WTO agreements, countries cannot normally discriminate between their trading partners. Grant someone a special favor, such as a lower customs duty rate for one of their products, and we have to do the same for all the other WTO members. National treatment. Treating foreigners and locals equally. Imported and locally produced goods should be treated equally at least after the foreign goods have entered the market. Let's now talk about the WTO dispute settlements. The WTO's procedures for resolving trade quarrels under the dispute settlement understanding is vital for enforcing the rules and therefore for ensuring that trade flows smoothly. A dispute arises when a member government believes another member government is violating an agreement or a commitment that is and has been made in the WTO. The person behind of these agreements are the member governments themselves. The agreements are the outcome of the negotiations among the members. Ultimate responsibility for settling disputes also lies with the member governments through the dispute settlement body. First, the complaining party requests formal consultations with the other WTO member countries or countries involved in the dispute. All such requests for formal consultations must be notified to the WTO's Dispute Settlement Body, DSB, which consists of representatives from all WTO member countries and administers the rules and procedures governing the dispute settlement process. The consultation period can last up to 60 days. If the consultation fails to resolve the problem, the complaining party can then request that the DSB establish a panel of experts to adjudicate the merits of the case. Panelists are normally selected in consultation with the parties to the dispute. If the parties cannot agree on panelists, the WTO will appoint them. The panel selection process can take up to 45 days. The panel process in many ways resembles a typical court case. Both parties to the dispute submit written briefs and present oral arguments before the panel. After hearing arguments from both the sides and after examining all the evidence, the panel makes its decision and prepares a draft report which is reviewed by both parties to the dispute, who are given an opportunity to comment on it. The panel then issues its final report, which includes its findings and recommendations. The final report should be issued as a general rule within 6 months of the start of the proceedings. The European Economic Community. The European Economic Community, EEC, the most prominent example of a free trade area, actually is what economists call a customs union. Whereas member nations in a free trade area remove all barriers to trade among themselves, in a customs union they also adopt uniform tariffs on goods and services from outside the union. The EEC is currently attempting to transform itself from a customs union to a true common market in which capital and labor, and not just goods, are allowed to flow freely from one country to another. The origins. The European Community is an amalgam of 3 separate communities. The European Coal and Steel Community, established by the Treaty of Paris in 1951 to regulate production and liberalize Europe's trade in coal and steel products. The European Atomic Energy Community, which was formed by the Treaty of Rome in 1957, and the European Economic Community, which was also created by the Treaty of Rome. The development. The EC's most important achievement has been its customs union. It was completed in 1968 when each of the 6 members abolished tariffs and quotas on goods from other 5 member countries and adopted a common external tariff on goods from the rest of the world. The evolution from a free trade area to a customs union followed inevitably had the participants maintained different external tariffs. Exports from, say, Japan could have been imported through the low tariff countries and transshipped to the others, circumventing the high tariffs. The customs union has propelled the growth of intra-community trade from less than 40% to over 60% of the total trade of the participating countries. The Single Market Program. In the 80s, Western Union suffered from persistent high unemployment. Productivity growth lagged behind other parts of the industrial world. The popular diagnosis was that Europe was suffering the effects of excessive government regulations and from the fragmentation of the European labor and the capital markets into a series of inefficiently small national markets. The disease was dubbed Eurosclerosis, and the prescription known as the Single Market Program was a community-wide initiative to deregulate and integrate national markets. Monetary unification. In 1988, with European integration gathering momentum, the governments of the EC member states appointed a committee chaired by Jacques Delors, President of the European Commission, to study the feasibility of complementing the single market with a single currency. Monetary integration is more controversial than the Single Market Program. Denmark rejected the Maastricht Treaty in its June 1992 referendum, and France nearly did the same 3 months later.
The European Union currently has 28 member countries. Croatia's entry to the bloc in July 2013 marked the EU's 7th enlargement to date. Originally a 6-nation bloc created in 1957, the EU family has been growing ever since. By 1973 there were 9 members, 10 in 1981 and then 12 in 1986. In 1995, no fewer than 15 countries had joined ahead of the biggest enlargement in 2004, which saw the EU expand to 25 members. From 2007 to 2013, there were 27. In order to join the organisation, candidates must prove they're committed to respecting and promoting key values such as guaranteeing democracy, human rights, and a functioning market economy. Complying with EU standards and rules is also essential, as is having the backing of the population, either in a parliamentary vote or a national referendum. Finally, membership is granted when all EU institutions and member states have given their consent. There are currently 5 official candidate countries: Iceland, Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. 3 more are considered potential candidates: Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo.
Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, was formed in 1967 by Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand to promote political and economic cooperation and regional stability. Brunei joined in 1984, shortly after independence from the United Kingdom, and Vietnam joined ASEAN as its 7th member in 1995. Laos and Burma admitted into full membership in July 1997 as ASEAN celebrated its 30th anniversary. Cambodia became ASEAN's 10th member in 1999. The ASEAN Declaration in 1967, considered ASEAN's founding document, formalized the principles of peace and cooperation to which ASEAN is dedicated. The ASEAN Charter entered into force on 15 December 2008. With the entry into force of the ASEAN Charter, ASEAN established its legal identity as an international organization and took a major step in its community building process. The objectives of the Associations of Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN. The ASEAN Declaration states that the aims and purposes of the association are to accelerate the economic growth, social progress, and cultural development in the region through joint endeavors in the spirit of equality and partnership in order to strengthen the foundation for a prosperous and a peaceful community of Southeast Asian nations, to promote regional peace and stability through abiding respect for justice and the rule of law in the relationship among countries in the region and adherence to the principles of the United Nations Charter. Political cooperation. The TAC stated that Asian political and security dialogue and cooperation should aim to promote regional peace and stability by enhancing regional resilience. South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC. The idea of regional cooperation in South Asia was first raised in November 1980. After consultations, the foreign secretaries of the 7 founding countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, met for the first time in Colombo in April 1981. This was followed a few months later by a meeting of the Committee of the Whole, which identified 5 broad areas for regional cooperation. The purposes. The SAARC seeks to promote the welfare of the peoples of South Asia, strengthen collective self-reliance, promote active collaboration and mutual assistance in various fields, and cooperate with international and regional organizations. Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, is a permanent intergovernmental organization created at the Baghdad Conference on September 10th and 14th, 1960 by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. The 5 founding members were later joined by 9 other members: Qatar in 1961, Indonesia 1962, suspended its membership from January 2009, Libya 1962, United Arab Emirates 1967, Algeria 1969, Nigeria 1971, Ecuador 1973, suspended its membership from December 1992, October 2007, Angola 2007, and Gabon 1975 to 1994. OPEC has its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland in the first 5 years of its existence. This was moved to Vienna, Austria on September 1st, 1965. The 1960s OPEC's formation by 5 oil-producing developing countries in Baghdad in September 1960 occurred at a time of transition in the international economic and political landscape, with extensive decolonization and the birth of many new independent states in the developing world. The 1970s OPEC rose to international prominence during this decade as its member countries took control of the domestic petroleum industries and acquired a major say in the pricing of crude oil on world markets. Benefits of OPEC. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and it is an international alliance that is responsible for coordinating the policies related to petroleum in its member states. The first 5 member nations of OPEC are Kuwait, Iraq, Venezuela, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. OPEC offers the following important benefits. It unifies different countries. The key objective of OPEC is to join together various countries with similar interests in the petroleum industry. In fact, it was established to unite against Western oil companies who are lowering oil prices. OPEC member nations produce about 45% of the total crude oil production in the whole world. This means that any actions that are going to be taken by this particular organization are going to be felt in the entire world. Regulates oil prices. Since OPEC member nations produce high amounts of crude oil, OPEC has a strong effect on the overall oil market, particularly on the price of oil. The member nations usually meet each year and make important decisions regarding the oil production. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. The World Trade Organization, WTO, is an international organization that establishes rules for international trade through consensus among its member states. The WTO's procedure for resolving trade quarrels under the Dispute Settlement understanding is vital for enforcing the rules and therefore for ensuring that trade flows smoothly. The GATT dispute settlement system evolved as an increasingly rule-oriented judicial system for resolving international trade disputes. Community countries subsidize the domestic production of agricultural goods despite their comparative disadvantage. The Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, was formed in 1967 by Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore and Thailand to promote political and economic cooperation and regional stability. The ASEAN community is comprised of three pillars: the political, security, community, economic community and socio-cultural community.